Okay, we are going over examples similar to the problems you're going to see on the Chapter 1 retake assignment. In this video, I'm going to go over a problem that is similar to the describing a graph questions that you're going to see on your retake assignment. So in this problem, this is not exactly the same as the one you're going to do on your assignment, but very similar, so you can follow these same steps. All right, we're going to have a lot of instructions to follow here. So let me zoom out so we can see all of them. The first one says that we want to make a table of x values, and it looks like we're starting at -5 and going all the way to 5. So I'm going to go ahead and start by building my table. It's going to have x values that they gave us, and then we're going to find some y values. That's going to be the most difficult and tedious part. So these are my x values. I'm just going to go ahead and start putting these in here. Okay. And it's our job to come up with the y values. Now this is going to be kind of tedious, but I'm going to give you some hints that will make it go a little bit faster for you. So let's work through our first y value here. We're going to be using this value of -5, and that is going to go into this equation here in place of all the x's. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by copying down the equation, but leaving the x's out with some parentheses in their place. So I left all of the x's out. Same equation though. -x² plus 2x plus 3. Now those parentheses are super important, especially if you're using a calculator. Please do not leave out those parentheses. You're going to find yourself getting incorrect answers. All right, in place of the x's, we need to put our x value, which is -5. All right, now what I need to do is I need to simplify this. So let's go ahead and do that. Now this is negative. So I'm just copying that negative. And then I'm going to do the -5². Now we're squaring both the 5 and the negative. So you're doing -5 times itself. -5 times -5 is positive 25. So this part of it here is 25, but the minus that was out front still stays. That's a little bit tricky. All right, let's see what we got here. Next, we're going to do this 2 times this -5. 2 times -5 is -10. And then we have our plus 3 at the end. And then I just need to add those up. -25 minus 10, that's -35. Plus 3 is -32, I believe. I might want to check that with a calculator. Why not? It's been a long day. -25 minus 10 plus 3. And we get -32. Now let me show you some ways that you can make this go a little bit faster. A couple different things that you can do. One of them is that we could have just put this entire thing into our calculator from the beginning instead of trying to work it out in steps like this. Make sure you read your instructions carefully though, because if they ask you to show your work, you're going to want to show this step in between. But if they don't, we could just type it in. So I'm going to type this in and just confirm that we're getting the correct answer, -32. So just starting from the left, that's negative parenthesis, -5, end parentheses, squared, plus 2, parenthesis, -5, end parenthesis, and then plus 3. Fingers crossed, -32 is the answer. So -32 is going to be my first y value. Now we just need to go back and redo that for all of the rest of them. If we've got to do this by hand, it's going to take us a while. If we can use the calculator, it's going to go a little bit faster. Let me show you some shortcuts either way though. So I'm going to do the next few of these, and I'm going to do them by hand. And I am just going to go ahead and set up my equation for each of them because the equation never changes. It's always going to be the same equation. So there's for negative 4. That'll be for negative 3. So I'm just setting up the equation. I'm not putting anything in just yet. I'm just getting it set up. All right, and we'll just do these next. Let's go for one more. Oops, I almost forgot my 2 there. Let's go back and put our numbers in for each of these. So in this first one, I'm going to be putting negative 4 in for my x's. And then my next one, I'll be putting negative 3 in, and then negative 2, and then negative 1, and then 0. So it saves me a little bit of time because in each one of these, I'm just putting in, I rewrote the same thing and then I'm putting the numbers in. Okay, I'll show you how we can make this part go a little bit faster too. I'm going to do this column first. I'm going to do each of these pieces. So I'm going to ignore the rest of this for right now and just look at the first term here. So for all of these, it's a negative number squared, and then we put a minus at the front. And when you square that negative, it's going to be a negative times a negative. It's going to give you a positive, but we are going to put the minus at the front. So I'm just going to think through, again, I'm ignoring all of this. I'm just looking at this piece here. I'm going to think about negative 4 squared. Negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16, but I'm going to put a minus in front. Then I'll do the same thing with negative 3. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9, but I'll put a minus in front. Negative 2 times negative 2 is positive 4, but I'll put a minus in front. Negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1, but I'll put a minus in front. 0 times 0 is 0, but I'll put a minus in front, as 0 doesn't really get positives or negatives. All right, now let's focus on the middle term. So I'm ignoring everything else and just doing 2 times each of those numbers. And for the next 4 anyways, I know it's going to be minus because it's a positive 2 times a negative number. So I'm just going to go ahead and put those minuses in there right now. And then I just need to do my multiplication. 2 times 4 is 8. 2 times negative 3 is minus 6. 2 times negative 2 is minus 4. 2 times negative 1 is minus 2. Here I got 2 times 0, that's just 0. And then I'm going to put my plus 3's on the end, and they all get a plus 3. And now all I need to do is go back and add everything up. So this can be a little tedious, but use your calculator if you need to. It's negative 24 plus 3 is negative 21. Negative 15 plus 3 is negative 12. Negative 8 plus 3 this is negative 5. Negative 3 plus 3 is 0. 0 plus 3 is 3. All right, and then those numbers just get copied into our table. All right, that's still pretty tedious. Let me show you the true shortcut here. If you have a calculator, one of these style of calculators, you can just go back to the thing that you typed in previously and change the numbers inside of the parenthesis. On these yellow calculators, the way you do that is you just arrow up so that the last thing you typed in is highlighted and hit enter. And then you can use your arrow keys to move your cursor inside of here. So for example, if I wanted to change these negative 5's to negative 4's, I could have just come in here, changed both of those to negative 4 and hit enter, and that would have given me my negative 21 that I had to work much harder for here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of these. We've already gotten down to 0. So I'm going to go ahead and just we'll start by putting 1's in here. Now for this, I'm going to need to delete both of my negatives. All right, so I'm going to change those both to 1's. The reason I'm putting 1's is because that's the next x value in my table. And my calculator is going to tell me that that's 4. And then I'm going to go back and do 2. that gives me a 3. Then I'm going to go back and do 3. And that gives me a 0. And I'll go back and do 4 and 5. Actually, I'm noticing that there seems to be a pattern here. These seem to be repeating each other. I bet we're going to get a negative 5 for this next one. Let's go ahead and double check. So we did 3. Let's go back and do 4s. I bet I'm going to get a negative 5. I sure am. I'm fairly confident that these numbers are just repeating themselves, right? 4, 3, 0, negative 5, negative 12. 4, 3, 0, negative 5. I bet this is negative 12. I'm so confident I'm just going to put it in there. All right. That's the toughest part of this, at least the most tedious part. From here, we're going to go ahead and graph it. This should be pretty basic. We just want to go ahead and graph these points and connect them with a nice smooth curve. We're not going to be able to graph any of these points because my x and y axis only go out to 5. Like negative 12, negative 21, those are too big. But we can do this one, negative 2 comma negative 5. So negative 2 in the x, negative 5 in the y. There's that point. Negative 1 comma 0. 1 comma 4, 1 comma 4. Ooh, I skipped something. 0 comma 3 would have been before that. There we go. Where are we at here? I did 0 comma 3. I did 1 comma 4, 2 comma 3. 3 comma 0, 4 comma negative 5, and then 5 comma negative 12 we're not going to fit on there. Hey, but that's given us that nice parabola, and we're expecting to see that kind of U-shaped curve. That happens a lot when we have an equation that has an x squared in it. So let's go ahead and describe this thing. Now there are different vocabulary terms and ways that we can do this. So if your teacher used a some different vocabulary, that's all right. But I'll go ahead and describe it how I teach it in my class. So the first thing I'm going to describe about this is the shape, and the shape of it is a parabola. I'm also going to note that it opens downward. You might say a U-shape or an upside-down U-shape. I'm using the technical term parabola. I like to do my intercepts early on, so my x-intercepts. I actually have 2 of them. There's one here at negative 1 comma 0. That's this one here. And there's another one right here at 3 comma 0. So those are the places where it crosses the x-axis. Let's do our y-intercept. That's where it crosses the y-axis. It's crossing the y-axis here at 0 comma 3. All right. Parabola has an important point called a vertex, and the vertex is kind of where it turns around and heads the opposite direction. That's this point right here, and that's happening at 1 comma 4. So vertex is at 1 comma 4. We often talk about the max and min. So the maximum on this graph is going to be the highest point on the graph. This does have a highest point. It's right here. There's no points on the graph higher than this one right here. And the coordinates of that point are 1 comma 4. How about the minimum? Is there a minimum point on this graph? I'd say these arrows are showing that the graph is going to keep going down forever and ever and ever. So we're not going to find a lowest point on the graph. So there is no minimum. Some people might say negative infinity because the graph does head towards negative infinity. I'm just going to say that there is no minimum. There is a line of symmetry here. This graph has a line of symmetry, and it cuts through that vertex. Your line of symmetry will always cut through the vertex. It's a vertical line, so it's going to get an x equals equation. and it is at x equals a value of 1. X equals 1 for that line. So I'll go ahead and list that here. Line of symmetry is x equals 1. We could talk about the domain and range of this graph. Let's talk about the domain. So the domain tells you how far the graph goes left and right, how far in the x direction, and x goes left and right. So 2 questions. How far does the graph go to the left? Now this arrow is showing me that the graph is going to keep going to the left forever and ever and ever. So I'd say the furthest it goes to the left is negative infinity. It just keeps going forever and ever because of that arrow. So that's the furthest to the left, comma, and then how far does it go to the right? Well, kind of the same thing. That arrow is going to show that it's going to go to the right forever and ever and ever. That'd be positive infinity. And when we do this with infinities, infinities will always get a parentheses. The range tells you how far down and up the graph goes. So the range gives you the y values that are on the graph, and the y-axis goes up and down. So 2 questions for the range. The first one is how far down does it go? So when we do range, we always go from the bottom to the top. So how far down does it go? I'd say it goes down forever and ever and ever and ever. So it goes down to negative infinity. Gets a parenthesis because all infinities do. And then how far up does it go? What is the y value where it tops out? Now the highest y value it ever gets to here is 4. All right, does that 4 get a parenthesis or a square bracket? Well, that depends. Is there a point on the graph with that y coordinate? If so, then it gets a square bracket. And I'd say there is a point. In fact, we've listed it already. It was the vertex or the max. So that does get a square bracket. There are other things that we could say about this graph. You may or may not have talked about this depending on your teacher and which textbook you're using. I could say that the graph increases at the beginning and then decreases at the end. We can talk about that the graph is non-linear because it does not make a straight line. There are some other things that your teacher may have discussed. That's a pretty good start for our description, though. Let's make sure that we haven't missed anything. The shape, x-intercepts, y-intercepts, vertex, max, min, line of symmetry, domain, and range. I think we caught it all. All right, one last video in this series. It's going to be about evaluating, and that'll be the next one on the playlist.